Welcome to the Solomon's Corner podcast, a place for thinkers. If you are unfamiliar with our content, we are a podcast dedicated to applying classical philosophy and thinking to cultural issues of our day and equipping people to live their own intellectual callings. If you want more details on that, you can pick up the book by A.G. Sertionge, The Intellectual Life. We are going to be doing that book in 2023, very early on. So if you want to read along with us and talk about that book, make sure you pick it up. Today, Dr. Bethel McGrew joins us on the podcast via audio. We had some technical difficulties at the initial onset, so we apologize for that. That being said, we get into some great topics that will surely encourage you in your own thought life as well as your own intellectual habits. Dr. McGrew will get into how she became a PhD, how she got the doctorate. Many people don't know because of her cultural engagement that she has a PhD in mathematics and how that formed her character. And we also discuss her experiences with great intellectuals like James Lindsay and Douglas Murray, as well as her analysis and virality around Jordan Peterson. She became the commentator on Jordan Peterson. So this is part one. So make sure you listen all the way to the end for the cliffhanger ending. And then next week, you will also get part two, where we get into some more of her cultural analysis. So without further ado, enjoy the interview. Remember to like, share, and keep thinking.
Welcome to the Solomon's Corner podcast, a place for thinkers. Join us as we explore the depths of theology, philosophy, and the Christian intellectual life.
Bethel McGrew, Dr. Bethel McGrew, and you were in the middle of telling us your origin story, but why don't we just pick it up from the top? Tell us a little bit about where you're from, how you got into cultural engagement, especially from moving from mathematics. Just kind of give us an overview.
Okay, so I am, it turns out, fun fact, from Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is also where you are from.
Correct.
And so we actually grew up in the same town and didn't even really know each other until, like a year or so ago. Well, maybe a little longer ago than that.
Yeah, well, and I remember the first time that we connected was because I was in seminary and your dad helped me out at my home church with an event for apologetics. And we had to do some field study. And one of the things we had to do was take our, abstract philosophy degrees that we were getting at seminary, at Southern Evangelical Seminary, for those who are wondering, and actually do something in the real world, so to speak. We can't just stay in the,
in the real world, in the church.
Yeah. I don't like to think of seminaries as ivory towers. They're more like ivory basements these days because people just don't really.
It's the Christian version of the ivory tower.
Yes, it is.
We can be honest and just say that.
Yes, that's for sure. So they wanted us to make sure we came out of our bubble and, dealt with some of these issues and in the real world and tried to communicate what we were studying to people. And your dad actually, it was actually a really cool moment because we were planning on, I still remember this because we would do Q&As at the end of everything. And I'm at my home church and it was just supposed to be him on the Q&A panel. He was like, no, we need everybody up here. And it's really kind of a testament to your dad. He that was like, a big inspiring moment for me because I was like, oh my word, I'm going to be on a panel with a super smart person. And he didn't care that I was there.
I actually remember that event. And I have good memories with that church because I did like a little girls group there when I was a kid.
My mom started that group.
Yeah, I know your mom started that group. I remember her.
She's going to listen to this. We got to give her a shout out. It's like,
shout out to
Christ Life
mom.
Ministries. There you go. Yep.
So and then I came back a little bit as a young single, and I actually did some music with a couple of the talented musical guys in your congregation. So
no way.
I did, yeah, actually. So it's just really cool to now be reconnecting. So anyway, my dad, you were mentioning my dad there, and he's done so much great work locally in my community. I mean, he's known as an academic and philosopher and an apologist. But man, if anybody knows how to put down roots, my dad has put down such great roots back in his hometown, and he's invested so much in people there.
Is your dad from Kalamazoo too?
No, he grew up in Pennsylvania.
Oh, no way. Okay.
Yep, and then he and my mom, that's where they met. Actually, they met at Baptist Bible College out there. And then they eventually got their degrees at Vanderbilt together.
Okay.
And then from there, they floated around a little bit, but they pretty quickly settled in Michigan with me when I was a toddler. So that Michigan's all I know, really.
Okay.
And so then Western Michigan was where I did both my college degree and my graduate degree after being homeschooled all through high school. And so we kind of went back and forth. We were joking before that we're my family is like the Sopranos of philosophy.
Yes, they are.
Yes, they
are
just
philosophical hitmen. That is what it is. And you are definitely following in the family tradition on Twitter.
Exactly.
It's like if I tweet something, I'm like, is the Bethel shark in the water right now? That's what happens. It's like, you better be careful.
Daniel, you're a friend of the family.
Yes.
You have nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I pay my dues. I pay my dues. I pay my rent.
You paid your dues. Yeah, you're good. But so anyway, I thought that I was going to be a philosopher. I very much wanted to, like wherever mom and dad were going, that's what I wanted to kind of do and be. But then at a certain point, they were like, look, you know what? You kind of need to figure out who you are. And we're not really sure that philosophy is an economically viable option at this point. So, would you consider maybe doing something else? And I had this problem that I loved the humanities. I loved literature and history and all that kind of stuff was what I was always obsessed with as a kid. And that was my mom's field because she has a degree in English Renaissance literature.
She does. I didn't know that.
Yep, that's her PhD.
Did she do a PhD in philosophy though?
No, that's the cool thing about my mom. She did her PhD in literature at Vanderbilt while my dad was doing his PhD in philosophy at Vanderbilt. And then she realized, a little bit like me with my PhD in math, she realized she actually didn't feel like doing research in English literature, even though she'd gone through all the hoops and had this PhD. What she was really interested in was philosophy. So that she just became a philosopher, as one does. So
that's crazy.
So that's my mom. And yeah, I know she's like now entered 3 different disciplines when she wasn't supposed to be able to.
Man.
Anyway.
You guys are like a bunch of Elon Musks, but in like the academic world. It's like Elon Musk is like, I'm going to build rockets. I'm going to make electric cars. I think I'm going to own a social media app. The McGrews are like, you know what? I think I'm going to do philosophy. Maybe literature. Maybe mathematics. I don't know.
Maybe. Although hopefully we've done better than Elon is doing with Twitter right now because I don't even know what else is going on. That's a whole story. We'll get into that later. So anyway, let's see. Where was I? Oh yeah.
You were talking about your PhD in math and studying at Western.
Yes. Okay. So because they didn't have a full PhD program in philosophy at Western. So I was going to have to move away. And I was kind of like timid, anxious personality type, didn't want to leave town. So they were like, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you see if you can get a teaching assistantship in the math program here instead. And then you can just live at home and save all the money from the assistantship and get a free ride with a doctorate. And then that'll kind of set you up and probably set you up better than a doctorate in philosophy.
And part of that is just a real quick question. Part of that is, if my understanding is that the master's program of philosophy at Western Michigan is pretty mathematically heavy, right? How did that transition work? Because I think a lot of people.
So I didn't. Just to clarify, I didn't do the master's program in philosophy either. I went straight into the math program out of undergrad.
I'm tracking now.
But yeah, because my dad is there, he does put a little more of a mathematical technical spin on some of the classes that he teaches, but I took a variety of things from him. So I learned a lot about philosophy of science, the theory of knowledge, philosophy of religion. I think I even did, we did a senior seminar on the existence of God for my capstone course. So yeah, that was pretty awesome. So then I went through the math program and that was hard. It was hard. It was humbling. One of the things about being homeschooled is I never really had any competition growing up,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I had friends, I had other smart friends, but, kids move away. You don't always stay in touch. People come and go in your life. And
especially now with how mobile our generation is. I mean, our generation just left. And also, everything.
Yep. But then also, with the economy, like in the wake of the crash and everything, a number of people just had to pull up.
You talking about the 2008 crash?
Yeah. So that affected our hometown deeply. So I didn't really have a lot of social connections on an intellectual level. And so, I'll be honest, I was kind of full of myself in some ways. I had this idea that everyone needed to hear my opinion about everything at all times, in all contexts.
Yeah.
And shockingly, they did not. So what happened to me was going through the math program was a real kind of humbling experience, because I suddenly realized, wow, I am not the smartest person in the room. I'm probably like the 8th smartest person in this room, actually. So I seriously, I met people who decided to not even finish their degrees, who were geniuses.
Wow.
Like Stephen Hawking level stuff. So I just figured, well, maybe if I work hard enough, I can make up for the fact that I'm not a genius at this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I did. I just worked my tail off for 5 or 6 years.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
I think that's important for people to know, because I think sometimes, number one, I don't think people outside of PhD programs understand how hard it is to get them.
Yep.
And I think the other thing is that a lot of times, especially, we read your pedigree, or your essentially your professional resume here. You're very successful. You've written a lot of things, and it's very easy for people to look at somebody like yourself and say, well, yeah, we always knew, but like, you didn't know, right? You had to go through all of these, what you describe as humbling experiences and work your tail off. And a lot of times people just assume that somebody like yourself, it just came naturally and it was just easy. So, hopefully that encourages some other people out there who are listening. I know it encourages me, because I had the similar situation where I was an athlete, and I just basically kind of coasted through college and got the GPA that I needed to graduate. And then was like, I think I want to study philosophy. And so I applied to a seminary, and of course seminaries take anybody. And but that's kind of a little unknown fact. But prior to that, I didn't really know that was the case. But when I got there, I was so, just getting my tail kicked. And so, but a lot of people, I think, don't understand that somebody at your level really had to go through the grinder to get to where you're at.
Well, the thing is, though, that my path is sort of weird, because, like at the end, I got to the end of that whole degree, and I got the piece of paper, and, my dissertation, the experience of writing that was not super exciting. I wasn't writing in a very, it was sort of a dry little subfield.
What'd you do your dissertation on?
A little topic in something called graph theory, which the way I try to explain graph theory to non-math people is that it's like, it's connect the dots, but fancy and mathematical, right? So like, I have these dots, okay? Yes. And I want to connect them, right? And there's like, you can set up all kinds of rules about it, and you can study, like, what if I gave each dot a different color? And, or what if I gave each edge a different color? Now, what's the smallest number of colors I could get away with, and give this final thing a certain property by the rules that I've set up? So it's like, think of it almost like an elaborate board game or something like that, where you're trying to play within the rules that you've set for yourself.
Okay, so, is it kind of like an elaborate geometrical proof? Is that
no,
fair
it's
to
not,
say? Okay, I'm going to stop asking questions that reveal my mathematical ignorance. That was the only one I wanted to ask.
No, that's fine. Proofs are involved, like, proofs are involved in any kind of math. Yes. But it's not geometry. Geometry would be like the study of triangles and stuff like that. This is like its own thing. And what I loved about graph theory, because I really did come to love it as hard as it was, is that, anybody can sort of drop in and start playing around with it. It doesn't really require a lot of heavy mathematical lifting, or like, first you have to go read these 5 books and then you'll be able to understand graph theory. Right. It's like, you can just sit down with a piece of paper and start doodling it. So it was so much fun that occasionally my dad would start working on a homework problem. They'd be like, hey, I think I solved it. I'm like, I hate you, Dad. I still haven't solved it. Don't tell me, okay? I'm supposed to do this by myself. Anyway, my dad should have been the mathematician, is the truth of it. Yeah. So anyway, I finished that, and I realized I actually cared more about writing than math, because, long story short, I didn't think that I was going to be a professional writer. I blogged just on the side for fun all through school. And then once I began writing about Jordan Peterson, that's when things kind of blew up, because there weren't a whole lot of Christians talking about him. Right. And so then, just because of the market, I guess, the market of ideas and Christians talking about things, I sort of became the it girl around 2018. And then I would, doors started opening, started getting invited on Unbelievable and all that stuff. And then pretty soon I'm talking to Douglas Murray, and it's like, whoa, okay, this is cool. And so, and I actually, that's a whole, there's fun stuff I could say there, but I have to get through the rest of the story. So I've been doing all of this with a pen name because I still thought that my future was going to be as an academic somewhere at a university or whatever, like, teaching math, I guess, now that I gone to all the trouble to get the PhD, right? Yeah. And so I couldn't really go around announcing that I was this super social conservative, right? And so from the beginning, I started blogging when I was like 17, 18, and my mom and dad were like, look, you got to do this incognito. You have to protect your future. So I'd done that. And then suddenly the writing had become this big part of what I did. And people were following me on Twitter, and I was having to appear on Unbelievable with a cartoon avatar and a pen name, and it was a little awkward. And once I got a high school teaching job out of grad school, which kind of took its own left turns, but that's a whole story unto itself. Yeah. I thought, okay, well, you know what? At this point, I think I'm just going to do this. I'm going to take the leap of faith, come out from behind the pen name, and just kind of see what happens. Because at this point, I feel like I'd rather be that kind of public intellectual figure than be forever hiding behind a cartoon avatar. I feel like at that point, I accumulated enough trust, enough people respected my work, thought of me as an important voice in the discourse or whatever, that I kind of owed it to the discourse and to the people who followed me to just be me and see what happens. So I did that about a year ago now, and it's been great so far. Now,
what was going through your head when you decided to finally hit that like publish button on your Substack? I've wondered about that because I was following this and I was like, because I've known that you were under the pen name for a while, and so I was like, I know who that is,
exactly.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the thing is, my folks are like not that famous outside certain particular spheres, right? I mean, they're very well regarded in philosophy circles, in apologetic circles, but outside those bubbles, nobody really knows who they are. But what would happen is every now and then somebody who happened to know them and also followed me would sort of DM me on the down low and say, hey, look, I listened to your podcast and I've listened to your mom's voice on a podcast and I know who you are, but I won't tell anyone. Okay. Your secret's safe with me. Because if anyone,
it's like if Batman was running customer service lines, it's like,
pretty much,
it's like, hey, I know that voice. It's like, he must be fighting crime at night.
Yes. And in my case, the women of my family all have a very strong vocal resemblance. And so it's pretty much cat's out of the bag once you've heard both of us on air. So, but they were all nice people, and they weren't the kind of people who I was worried about making trouble for me if I was exposed. So what was going through my mind? It was exciting. It was cool. It felt like I could finally kind of own my space in the public square. But I did kind of realize I might be foreclosing certain future career choices. So I don't know how certain kinds of community colleges might look at my work. It might be like, oh, well, is she going to support diversity, equity, and inclusion or whatever? Kind of things you're supposed to say, oh, yes, I totally support, yada, yada. I don't know. It's what it might functionally mean is that I have to carve my way in Christian spaces, and maybe specifically classical Christian school type spaces, which is where I've landed currently. Although I'm only working on a part-time basis at the moment, but I'm hoping to kind of switch around and just kind of see where God leads there. I don't really know what my future holds at this point. I'm hoping to, obviously, I don't make a living as a writer. I guess I should probably make that clear. I make a nice side hustle as a writer currently. But just to anybody out there who sees me and who might think, wow, if I could do that, then maybe I could. I'm like, no, you couldn't actually. Right. I just need to sort of tell people that it's going to help. it's definitely, especially if you're, if you have a job that doesn't pay great,
right.
It does not hurt at all, but it cannot be a living unless you make it as an editor somewhere or something.
Yeah.
That's just how the writing business works. So
unless you're Jack Carr and you sign Chris Pratt for an Amazon Prime series, which I think he's doing pretty good.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So nope, it's not a big deal, but it's a nice, modest side hustle.
Yeah.
So, at this point, I'm just kind of, living on canned tuna and chicken or whatever, but I make a pretty mean tuna casserole. So I'm pretty happy, to be honest. I live out in the country. I take pictures of apple trees and walks in the woods. And it's just like, it's a simple life, but it's this kind of simple rural writing life.
Yeah.
And I'm happy with that. So
we'll see. We were talking about it before the podcast. You haven't read The Intellectual Life, but I've been following you for a while now. And I have read the book, and I know that that you are actually living it. And one of the things
yes.
that Sir Talange talks about is obviously you need to write. You can't be a thinker, I don't think, unless you're at least not necessarily writing publicly, but you do have to write your ideas, because a lot of, at least for me personally, I can't speak for Dr. Bethel here, but I know for me, that's where the reflecting time comes, and I actually learn, kind of where my holes are in my arguments, so to speak, before I put them out onto the actual public world.
Yep.
But the other side of it is that he says, intellectuals have to be okay with small beds. They have to understand that they're not in the intellectual pursuit because they want to make a name for themselves. They're in the intellectual pursuit because that's what God's called them to,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
And you definitely are an example for that. You did mention DEI, and we just had a marketing guy come on who had worked at a lot of different agencies and stuff. And his name's Brett Craig, and he just interviewed with us last week about his experience with DEI. And even though you weren't pushed out of something with DEI, he was, what do you think people, as far as like the DEI culture and things like that, do you think that's going to stick around? Do you think it's going to die off? Do you think that it's going to just gain more momentum as we go? Like, what is your perspective on that? Just briefly. We don't have to dive into it. I know it wasn't in the list of questions I sent you, but since you brought it up.
It's a really interesting question. Is it like a fad?
Yeah.
I don't think it is going away. And I think briefly my reasoning for that is that it was really in the works for so long. I mean, my mom did her PhD. My mom and dad both did their PhDs in the early 90s.
Yeah.
In fact, she was finishing up right when I was a little kid.
Okay.
And so she'll tell me, I saw like the roots of all this stuff already back then. Right. I saw it kind of taking shape at the university level. So, and yeah, there's been new add-ons like the transgender stuff, which wasn't a thing in the early 90s.
Right.
But it's really an extension of what was begun then.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it will always be around in some form or other. And yeah, it'll morph and it'll shift. Some things will be added. Maybe some things will be dropped. But I think it's really, at this point, it's a feature, not a bug.
Right. And it's, if you saw What Is a Woman, right? Did you watch that?
Oh yeah. Yep.
You saw, yep. And it's like the advantages of not having an essentialist view of the world is that you can basically morph it into whatever you want at the moment. Like with that professor that Matt Walsh was interviewing, and he's like, well, that's what we would call an essentialist view, and that's what you're trying to push on me, and all this kind of stuff. And like you said, it's a feature, not a bug. It's like, well, yeah, because when everything is just kind of a malleable set of particulars, and you can kind of just define things how you want, it makes you pretty invincible. I do have another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You describe yourself as a Christian humanist.
Yes.
What is that?
Okay, so yeah,
I just, full disclosure, I like that I don't know what you would call it, like that label, I guess you would say. Like, I like the demarcation you've got going there, but that was one of the questions I've been dying to ask you. So
yes, it's a great question that I don't feel like I get asked often enough. So I think the way I would put it, the way I've put it before, is I take the leaf from Francis Schaeffer, and I define it as a Christian who believes in stealing humanism back from secularism.
And what does that look like for you? What do you mean? How does that work out practically in the way you engage with people and some of the arguments you make?
So I read a lot of, I read people who I guess I think of as old humanists in a way, so that they retain a sense that man is valuable, that people have dignity and worth and need to be preserved in some way, which means that if they're not Christians, it bugs them that they're not Christians, and they feel a sort of an unease about that. And even people who are content not to be Christians, but who still have this a deep sort of a universal love of mankind, I guess. So there's an old writer, essayist named Warren Isley, who my dad introduced me to, saying, you got to read this guy.
Warren Isley? Is that what you said?
Lauren Isley.
Lauren.
Loreneisleyi, I think. And his story, The Star Thrower, has kind of taken on a life of its own, and you can find different versions of it. But somewhere you should just find the original and read it. It's so beautiful.
Okay.
So he was like a secular nature writer, essayist, thinker, and his stuff is just it's very humane writing, but very divorced from the Christian worldview. And so what I like to do is to sort of try and kind of reach back across the divide and say, well, look, this that you're responding to is objective. It is real, but I'm the one who can explain it. I'm the one who can actually put it in context for all y'all. And as far as I'm concerned, Christianity is the original humanism. Right. And you're just sort of running on the fumes.
Well, and one of the things that when I read that, it made me think of, because I don't know, all of the background of your story growing up in the Christian cultural, milieu. But one of the things that was going around when I was in the athletic space was essentially get somebody saved and then, meet their human needs. Right. There was this kind of which I know that this is a little bit different from what you're talking about as far as, secular humanism and kind of the worldview that you approach it with, of like the arguments and the underlying metaphysical things that maybe a secular humanist would call phenomenon, whereas we would call it, well, we actually know why that phenomenon is. Is that accurate? Would you say just a summary of what you're getting at?
So it's, there's epistemology,
right,
which is how we know things.
Yep.
And there's ontology, which is how things originate, right? So we might share some epistemology with people, but Christians have the best ontology.
Yes. And from the standpoint of, the way I've kind of approached my own kind of, I didn't realize it until I read your label. I didn't take it into the philosophical approach as much as I did into the practical, but it was, the idea of, well, I should probably just meet your human needs first before I start launching into the gospel, because that was kind of my cultural upbringing. Was not because of my parents or anything like that. It was just, that felt like the message that was always there. It's like, give them a track, or like sermons where it was like, don't leave a track unless you leave a big tip. That was kind of some of the stuff that people were going after. But you mentioned this Lauren Isley, and one of the things I wanted to ask you before we dive into some of the more what I've labeled here on my list of questions as meaty topics, is what would you say are three authors, just off the top of your head, that you think that lay intellectuals should be reading but aren't?
Yeah, so he's I think a good voice to go back to, who's like not really.
Lauren Isley is?
Yeah. He's not really mentioned or discussed that much anymore.
Do you think The Star Thrower is a good one to start with? Or is there something else you would recommend?
It's just, so it's the title of a little collection, The Star Thrower and other essays, which I'd have to check and see. I hope it's still in print. I'll just look it up real quick. But The Star Thrower is like, it's a short thing. And you can there's even a few videos on YouTube of like somebody reading it aloud with footage of like ocean surf and stuff. So,
okay, cool.
Yeah, for people who like audio, it's easy to just listen to some of these short essays. And so, you can actually can't actually find that collection. It's on Kindle and paperback and stuff. So,
oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good. And I mean, I think what it might feel like is if you were to go back and watch the original Star Trek show, it's sort of from that era. It's like this kind of touching faith in mankind, right? Like, like we're like deep down, we're good. We really are. And we can do this, and we can climb the stairs to the best version of ourselves kind of thinking, which is not true. Of course,
C.S. Lewis dealt with that pretty extensively and pulled the mask off of that ideology.
He did.
Pretty hardcore.
Definitely, for sure. And of course, that can take dark turns, which we see in stories like that, Hideous Strength. Yeah. But I think there can be a kind of a sort of a noble core there. Viktor Frankl is somebody I would throw out there. Man's Search for Meaning. That's a great kind of a source text, which kind of, it's like the best humanism can do without God, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of allusion. Like if you like Jordan Peterson,
yes,
you will like Viktor Frankl, and you will read Frankl, and you will be like, is that Jordan Peterson's voice I'm hearing in the background?
You could.
It's like suffering is a gift, man. It's like that's pretty much. That's what happened when I read Frankl on that subject.
So okay, those are a couple, but I actually had a few others specifically for like the Christian intellectual.
Right.
Okay, so to kind of go back to my folks, their project. I mean, a lot of my folks' project is sort of a retrieval project of going back to old dead guys who were writing in the 1700s and the 1800s that nobody reads anymore. And so I would say William Paley is one of the best of those. And so his evidences for Christianity, I mean, like that stuff still slaps. It's great. It has not been, like some people will tell you, it's not outdated. It hasn't been, overwritten by the current scholarship or whatever. It's like, just ignore the current scholarship. Read Paley.
Yes.
Paley is great. He's based.
We will definitely add him to our 2023 reading list.
That would be awesome. So then, if I'm allowed to say this, I think you should read my mom.
Yes,
because
absolutely. I have her book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's written 3 books at this point, and is working on getting a 4th one out there.
She has 3 already?
Yeah.
Are they all around undesigned coincidences, or are they different?
No,
subjects?
that's the first one, and then the other 2 branch out into some other stuff. And one of them's actually all about the Gospel of John. So if you like New Testament and like gospel reliability, and you want to get a better handle on some of that evidence, and you're kind of bored of the same old kind of prepackaged, here are 5 facts apologetics approach. Okay, don't get me started.
I won't say who you're referring to. I understand where you're going, but that's all right. It's okay.
So anyway, if you want,
moving on.
If you want the good stuff, you should check out my mom's work, because she's really good. So I would, in a kind of like a Christian apologetics, strengthening your faith kind of vein, I would point to that.
Yeah. Well, and I would like to just say one little thing on that, since I went to a seminary on apologetics. One thing that I think a lot of people gravitate towards is the evidential apologetics, because it's very tangible. And in the same way, I think philosophy has a parallel there, where ethics becomes kind of like this kind of gateway drug into philosophy, because that's where the meat is, and then they kind of start getting into some of the ontology and epistemology later on.
Yeah.
But I think one of the challenges too for people who might be sitting here thinking, wait, why are you guys kind of laughing or chuckling a little bit? I'll say it because I don't have any problem saying it, but I don't know what Bethel thinks about this for those listening, but I will say that I've always struggled a little bit with minimal facts approaches to the resurrection, because it oftentimes causes people to get a little bit obsessed with the evidences that they can present. And once they actually formulate their resurrection argument, there's no logical reason that you have to jump into the Christianity of their denomination. So, for example, somebody presents the resurrection as, evidences of the empty tomb or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, yeah, but a Mormon could easily co-opt that too, right? Because they can, if the argument is Jesus rose from the dead, therefore you should be a Baptist. It's like, well,
yeah, exactly.
It's like,
well, and I mean, it's funny you should say that, because in the course of this retrieval work that my dad did, because he got a grant from the Templeton Foundation a while ago.
Oh, okay, cool.
They created an online library of historical apologetics. You can go. It's this incredible archive. It's
is that still based? Is it based at Western Michigan? Because I remember looking that up in seminary and kind of doing a little bit of research on what it was and things like that. But is it a part of Western Michigan University, or is it? It was. I mean, he got a grant to work on it with some assistance and stuff. I mean, I think it's been closed for a few years now, but the fruit of that work is now on the library, and so then people can go there and click around and on the library at Western Michigan.
No, online library. Like it was all. So part of the work was digitizing these old texts and creating PDFs and stuff. So people can you can actually. For free.
Okay, we'll make sure we get a link from you then.
Definitely include a link to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, but where I was going with that is, funny enough, some of the guys, like some of the most based 18th century resurrection apologists were heretics. There's like, wow, this guy is awesome. Oh, he's a Socinian. Okay, interesting. Or Arians. Like people who don't even believe that Jesus was God, but like they're totally lit on arguments for why Jesus rose from the dead. Right.
Now, real quick on that pronunciation, did you say Arians or Arians? Because I've always thought it was Arians.
I think you could say it either way. I just tend to say Aryan. I don't.
You're the one with the PhD, Bethel. I'm gonna punt to Arians. That is how we will say it on Solomon's Corner from now on. We will punt to authority. The Arian heresy. I'm just kidding. Anyway, keep going.
But you're exactly right. And I mean, that's just one of many reasons why I have a problem. It's not that I'm shy about saying that I have issues with it. It's just that, to the contrary, once I get going, I'm not going to be able to stop. But I mean, if I can speak briefly, I think we have to get past a kind of minimalist frame in general, because so much of it for so long has been, I think, allowing academic, non-Christian academia to set the terms for the discussion. And the Christians have kind of done a strategic retreat, gotten together in a little huddle and been like, okay, well, let's try to find some stuff that even secular academics could agree on, right?
Yeah.
And well, like, if we can find, like 5 things, right? Then we can go out there and it'll be this great sort of jujitsu thing, like in a debate, right? And it doesn't take very long. Right. And you can just hand it to a secular and it'll sound impressive. Like even skeptical people will agree that Right. And so then once you present that, then, I mean, that should be enough to justify the resurrection. And then once they believe in the resurrection, like that's like if Jesus rose from the dead, then Christianity is true. I will literally hear people say that.
Oh, yeah.
I just like want to call time, be like, wait, no, stop. You don't. So,
and I'll just confess, like I was one of those people for sure, like getting started in it, because again, you start dipping your toes into these waters, and there is this, the way that a lot of these guys carry themselves, and I'm not knocking it, because I think that part of this is just okay.
No, but keep going.
It's just I think part of it is they get a PhD in this area, especially some of these guys, they get a PhD from a secular university or whatever on their topic, and they're using that as kind of the weight to throw behind these particular arguments. And you're this guy who's, for me, I'm working in a PT clinic. When I start getting into apologetics, I have patients who are literally suffering through exercises at my expense, and they're asking questions, and it's like, well, I can give you this great argument for the resurrection. I can give you this, and by the way, this guy's got a PhD, and and like you're saying, and even atheists accept this, kind of a thing. And I found myself,
doesn't it?
It's great. I mean, it's great marketing. It's great. It's great
marketing
branding.
is exactly the word. That's exactly it, and that's what my my folks, as they looked into this stuff, because I mean, what's interesting about my folks is they came into the world of apologetics from the world of just hardcore philosophy.
Yeah.
So I mean, they had paid their dues in that world with loads of published articles and things, and then kind of asked themselves, okay, well, but our heart is really with spreading the gospel, giving people good reasons to believe, and so let's see if we can kind of turn our academic energies to that. And then they sort of came in and realized, oh, this is actually like not great as it is currently. So how can we make this better? So then, the minimalist thing, it just doesn't do what it says it's going to do. And they became comfortable with, just as you said, it was a marketing tool. And it was like, always be closing, right? It's like the sales pitch. You got to get them to say the resurrection is true. Then they're going to be Christians. And then, phew, like it works, right?
Yes.
And it's like, but it's not good.
Yeah. That is an argument, by the way, for why Christian apologists need to go and work in the secular world for a little bit, because as soon as they see what a sales pipeline looks like, it's like, hey, I think I've seen that before. Oh, it's my evangelism techniques.
Yep. But then you figure out. I mean, it's been an interesting experience for me because I grew up in this sort of apologetics bubble, because my folks and all these people around, it's like apologetics. And then I kind of get out a little bit. Yep. And I start kind of carving out my own little niche as a writer. And I realize, like nobody's heard of these people. Yeah. This, and you realize what a small pond Christian apologetics really is.
Well, and on that note too, I can say, that when we were getting into apologetics and things like that, and I went to Southern Evangelical Seminary, which brands itself as an apologetic seminary, and it's a great school. They haven't succumbed to DEI, so I recommend it all the time. When I was there, though, the Daily Wire wasn't a thing yet. It was still just Ben Shapiro and Andrew Klavan and these guys kind of on their own YouTube channels. And I remember, being like, these guys are kind of doing what a lot of these seminaries are doing, which was creating these apologetics programs. They were creating these degrees.
Like PragerU type.
Yeah. Right. Like, I mean, the content and form was different, but as far as the arguments were concerned, I mean, PragerU started bringing out these arguments for the existence of God. But the thing was, and Ben Shapiro would do like a pro-life argument or whatever, and inevitably they would end up getting into some sort of philosophical apologetic or for God's existence or morality or whatever. And it was like, outside of basically a Habermas, kind of resurrection argument, they were basically covering all the bases, right, of anything else on the periphery that would be considered apologetics as well.
Right. Ben would be there because, Ben is Jewish. Right. So he's got a lot of the same natural theology type stuff.
Like problem of evil, Maimonides, these kinds of things. So he's doing, it's like, man, these guys are, but the thing is, they're like doing it and making it cool. And it's like, this is going to be some competition for us, folks. So we've got William Paley, because I want to get into some of these other questions too about COVID and things like that. Sure. You've got William Paley, you've got your mom's book. Which book, if you had to say to start, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think her first book, Hidden in Plain View, is the most accessible, the shortest. Okay. And focuses particularly on the argument from undesigned coincidences, which it's hard to define in like 30 seconds, but I've gotten good at explaining this. So very briefly, an undesigned coincidence is the sort of organic interlocking of two different books of the Bible. And you can see it all through the Bible, but her book focuses on the Gospels and Acts and also Paul's epistles. Mm-hmm. So essentially what it does is it strengthens the argument that the Gospels and Acts and Paul's epistles are being independently written by different guys. And so you don't have this kind of evolutionary model of development where stuff started basic and got more fanciful and embellished over time. Right. These are reliable sources up close to the facts, each giving their own version or spin on things. And they sort of accidentally fit together the way that independent witness testimonies would accidentally fit together just in history or giving evidence at a trial or something like that. So
they're like organic events, basically. They're not fabricated in any way. And so the question becomes, well, if we have fabricated events and we have spontaneous organic events, what are the characteristics that separate those two apart? Is that a fair way of summarizing your mom's work?
Yeah. So to give an example, in one gospel, you have Herod speaking to his servants, getting antsy about who Jesus is because he's had John the Baptist executed. So now he's like, who's this new guy? I'm kind of nervous about this. And so, you might kind of wonder, I wonder how Matthew, writing Matthew's gospel, knows what Herod Antipas was saying to his servants. Now, I mean, you could say God revealed it to him by divine inspiration. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, you might look for a more organic explanation first. So then if you switch to, I think it's a passage in Luke, totally different context. It's just listing the names of some women who helped out Jesus and his disciples with a food train and stuff. And one of the women is Joanna, who is the wife of Chuza, Herod's household steward. And it's like this little do. It's Joanna and so-and-so and so-and-so. And it's not a big deal. But if you do the instant replay,
right,
then you kind of realize, so they knew somebody who knew somebody.
Yeah.
So they heard it through the grapevine.
Right.
And so it's not like Luke is trying to explain Matthew, right? He's not even talking about the same incident that Matthew is describing where Herod's having a conversation. So there's dozens and dozens of little tiny things like that. And once you put them all together, it's like building a puzzle. So, if I just put a few pieces on the table, it's like, so what? I see a few puzzle pieces. It's not very interesting. It's like, yeah, but wait for it.
Yeah.
And you start gradually putting it together and you go, oh, I see. It's a picture of Jesus,
Yeah.
So that's a really cool beginning, but it's just the beginning. And then her other two books, The Mirror or the Mask, and then The Eye of the Beholder, which is about John. John is, John who saw. He's the beholder.
Okay.
Those books are longer. They're a little more demanding. But if you're really interested in diving into a solid look at the New Testament and looking at different theories of how it came together, is it more literary? Maybe in the ancient world, people were more free to invent stuff and the audience would just have kind of understood that. And maybe that can help explain why there are contradictions or whatever. That's a route that a number of scholars have taken, including some Christian scholars. And so Mom just kind of takes a hard look at that. It's like, okay, what is there anything here? Is there any merit to these theories? And spoilers, the answer is no. And so at the end, she's just making the case, look, what we have is, it's basically historical reportage, right? It's like reading memoirs of World War II or something like that. These are either people who were there themselves, in the case of Matthew and John, or in the case of Mark and Luke, people who knew people who were there themselves. So still very close, right? So that's how we should treat the Gospels. We shouldn't overcomplicate them. We don't need to spin out these strange, elaborate, overwrought theories about them. Just, we can take them pretty much as we find them.
Yeah. You don't have to be the guy in the meme with a cigarette in his hand. You know what I'm talking about? He's got it's like what everybody uses for a conspiracy theory meme. Have you seen that?
Yes.
You don't have to be that with your evidentialist apologetic.
You don't have to be that guy. Exactly. Yep. I know exactly the meme you're talking about. Right. Yep.
So moving towards more of some of the more cultural issues, one of the, you've had interactions with Jordan Peterson. Well, James Lindsay and Douglas Murray. You haven't done an interview with Jordan Peterson, right? Did I miss something on that? No.
He's over my head. He's beyond me.
But you have done, James Lindsay and Douglas Murray. Those are no small fish either. But one of the things that I have kind of gotten concerned about is the fact that the brave, kind of playing off of your, kind of Christian humanist and the intersection between that and secular humanism, is that these guys are not professing Christians, and yet they are fighting a lot of the battles that the church is probably better equipped to fight.
Mm-hmm. Well,
can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, and I have to say, I became less of a fan of James Lindsay as time went on, mm-hmm. with the whole Twitter persona that he created.
Yeah,
and then he started trying to tell Christians how to do theology, yes. Which it got really weird. And then he started picking fights with Christians who were actually really conservative.
Yeah, I remember that. You
it's
started
like,
doing some
dude,
stuff where it was like,
what's wrong with you?
You can
I know.
stay in your lane.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but he was really useful because he would do like those deep dumpster dives into queer theory and
Yep.
stuff. I do think, I mean, we do have Neil Shenby.
Yeah.
So the thing I did with Lindsay, I actually, Neil was also there, and we
Okay.
had a nice 3-way discussion. So I do think I would point to Neil as a guy who's doing a lot of that kind of spade work in the Christian realm. But there should be a bunch of guys like Neil, to your point,
Yeah.
that like he shouldn't be the one go-to guy for critical theory. This should really have been a group effort for a really long time. So yeah, I think that is really unfortunate. And it sort of could get into the question of why a number of churches and pastors tend to be timid here, or they feel like, I mean, you mentioned in the questions you sent me, you said that you'd had trouble getting churches to coordinate a showing of What is a Woman because they felt like it was too controversial.
Right. Well, or even you can take the BLM stuff too. I don't know. We're at Anglican in the Anglican Church. I can't remember. You're in the ACN? Are you at an Anglican church, or do you?
I am. I mean, I'm in a dying version thereof. I'm in the ACC, and you're in the ACNA, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But our diocese, during the George Floyd thing that occurred, the George Floyd, killing. What ended up happening was, our diocese just basically 5 days after the thing came out, and it's still there. You can go and look at it on the Diocese of the Carolinas, using a lot of the language of BLM, a lot of clearly not, trying to align with BLM and its ideology, but trying to make sure like, hey, we're not a target, kind of a thing is what it reads like. It's like, we're going to use your language. We're going to use this stuff. We're going to try and find scriptural passages to kind of overlap. But they did a lot of,
a lot of evangelical denoms have done their own versions of that,
right.
And Catholics will do their version of that. And so, I think the reason why the church has been behind here, there's a few different reasons for that. And it was good that you asked this question because as I was thinking this through, it was becoming clear in my mind. I think that like the church wants to reach people, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're very well-meaning, and if they're relatively conservative, like let's not talk about like the mainline churches, because as far as I'm concerned, they're not even churches, right? So let's talk about like ACNA or your sort of your typical seeker-friendly church down the street. They're sort of eager to try and see if they could find points of agreement, right? Yep. Or like handholds. So okay, well, we're not going to go like full liberal and say abortion is cool and stuff like that, but we can all agree that racial justice is good, right? I mean, who could possibly object to that unless they were, I don't know, a racist or something? So, hey, let's see if we can, meet the culture halfway, and that way maybe we can get them to come to church, and we could preach the gospel. Then we'll see fruit, right? And that's how a lot of these guys are trained. So I don't necessarily blame them. I sort of blame this kind of broader philosophy of evangelism.
Yep.
Which, I mean, I guess you could say it goes back to the 80s or the 90s or whatever.
Are you kind of, just to clarify, are you kind of thinking of it sounds like what you're saying anyway, so correct me if I'm wrong, is the, basically love people to Jesus kind of a thing. Hey, let's set aside these kind of and intellectual barriers that you might have. Sure. And let's just have a meal and. Yeah, right. Friendship evangelism, but also, sort of like the Tim Keller model, right? Yes. Like the kind of, if you read Center Church, contextualization, right? We want to see if we could contextualize the gospel for people's cultural frames, right? Which kind of sounds good. Like, oh, okay, well, I mean, right.
But the issue is that a lot of people, they're tenderhearted, but they don't have very strong spines,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's a danger that they will sort of end up inviting people to gaslight them,
Yeah. Right.
And you'll see this with race stuff. You see it with sexuality stuff. Some very well-meaning pastor will go out and say, I'm going to host a discussion group for gay men in my part of California, and like, I'm just going to invite them to come, and I'm not going to judge. I'm just going to sit and listen to their stories and whatever.
Right.
And, a few months later, they're leading him around by the nose, and he's like, oh, yeah. Oh, was that offensive? Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't want to I'll be quiet. I'll just be quiet and listen, And so this is how this sort of stuff takes hold. And critical theory underlies a lot of that, that organizing people by group, racial minorities, sexual minorities, that standpoint epistemology view, you have to just shut up and listen while we talk because we are like this, the privileged suffering victim.
When you say standpoint epistemology, are you referring to kind of like the victim hierarchy that,
kind of, sort of, right? So it means that if I am part of an oppressed minority group, then I have a special insight or like a special standpoint, a special way of knowing that you don't have if you are not part of the same oppressed minority group that I am.
Yeah.
So that means that I have a kind of an access that you don't.
Right.
Which means that I get to set the terms for the conversation.
Yeah. And I want to point out, because you mentioned Neil Shenby, this isn't moral relativism. And Neil did a good job on Breakpoint. I can't remember. It was years ago when Neil was just starting to kind of come around and become more of a public influence, at least in my circle. And he was having a conversation with the host, and the host was like, it's moral relativism. He was like, no. It's not moral relativism.
Right.
They believe they have a superior position on reality, that they're the ones who know reality's objective meaning because of their victim status, and you're blinded by it. It's kind of this like weird inverse of what some very hard-lined Calvinists will say, like, until you get saved, you don't really see reality as it is until you're actually in the fold.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned Calvinism, because if you look at some of the stuff about like being white is the original sin. I mean, you can sort of go down the line and see all these parallels, right? And that was that was something that work that Lindsay did that was kind of interesting. So I just think he kind of outlived his usefulness in some ways.
Well, it didn't help that he got canceled either. I mean, he doesn't really get a chance. That's one of the things that stinks about getting canceled is, because everybody makes a mistake every now and then, and or makes us. And again, I think this is one thing I wish conservatives and Christians would learn is, you've used the word strategy quite a bit here.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand that it feels like a lot of times that we are in a battle. And that, if you're talking about the war in Afghanistan or somebody, and a soldier comes back from war and he's like, I made a mistake or whatever, they're very quick to say, but you were in a war and, and like you made the best judgment that you could at the time and all this kind of stuff. They don't give that same kind of mercy to people who are in the culture war. It's like as soon as somebody makes a mistake, it's like, well, hold on a second. I know.
And I mean, I think if I'm remembering right, I had like the actual some of the stuff he got canceled for, and eventually it was like using the word groomer or something like that. It was so stupid. Like it was the kind of stuff like I'm not a fan of James for other reasons, but the stuff he was actually canceled over was no big deal. But so anyway, so to get back to what I was saying about standpoint epistemology, this is and this could kind of lead into a different question you asked, which is what's apologetics going to look like going forward?
That was where I was going to go.
Right. How does apologetics in 2022 look different from apologetics in 2002? Right. So I think this is one way that we see that is, like you're saying, these people really are moral absolutists at heart. Mm-hmm. And so the old kind of judo moves of, like disproving relativism, right? Like your sort of starter kit apologetics.
Right. Or punting to authorities too. Like, I mean, a lot of times, like, using somebody like a William Lane Craig or whatever. Well, what happens when we don't have a William Lane Craig or a Tim McGrew or, in those academic positions anymore?
Sure. Yeah. But so my point was that it no longer works to point out that you can't be a moral relativist because, like you're saying, these people aren't actually moral relativists. And so you actually have to get down and dirty with the details of what their moral absolutes really are and what their ideology and worldview is, because it's a competitor to Christianity at this point. And in some ways, it's sort of a parasite on Christianity. It's it's borrowing ideas about human dignity and justice and compassion and that sort of stuff, and then grafting them onto this sort of secular tyranny, basically.
Well,
so
I know that I think he saw, I mean, for a while there, we were doing Shezhuoth Miwosh's The Captive Mind. Because, it's hard to describe what's going on in a lot of ways in this cultural context, because it's not the, James Lindsay has the book like Racial Marxism or it's not the same kind of totalitarianism or tyranny that manifested in the same way in like the Soviet Union or in Poland, but the form of like stimulating hatred between groups is still the same. Mm-hmm. And then, Miłosz actually uses the example of a spider that actually uses venom to paralyze a caterpillar and then lays its eggs. And the caterpillar is still alive while these little, minions basically hatch on the system that preceded it, and then, co-opt it for their own means. And so, just from that standpoint, it's very, very similar. Do you see us losing, like, for example, Jordan Peterson, if he, this is kind of how my mind was thinking when I phrased that question about institutions is, if Jordan Peterson is, a public intellectual who's going to get canceled, basically, then a conservative Christian has no shot in hell, right? I mean, like he's,
yeah,
like, he's a
right,
goner.
Because Peterson's a liberal, really. Right. I mean, he's like, it's your classic old liberal who got mugged by reality is how we used to put it. So, but then, it's an actual conservative. Forget about it. Yeah.
Like, what do you think? Because when I was in, the seminaries and stuff, it was like, well, we've got access to this guy and this guy and this guy, and his writings are published here. And you could even go on, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and you might find some articles by a Christian guy or even a guy who's
you'd find an article by my dad. He wrote the article on miracles. So
and so at the end of the day, though, as the next generation kind of starts coming up and starts taking in some of these positions, how do you see, do you see the institutions kind of just crumbling under this weight, or do you think that we'll still have intellectual position as far as institutions where we have professors and we have them able to, write articles like on miracles or something like that? Or do you see this kind of just completely being obliterated from the academic discourse?
It is hard. It is really difficult. I've definitely had friends who, they went dark basically on social media when they entered their PhD program.
Right.
I know a guy who's, I won't say where, but he's in a very top shelf program right now. Right. And he has no paper trail online.
Yeah.
Just, totally in the closet conservative. Right. And so that wasn't, that sort of thing wasn't really an issue back in my dad's time. Right. My dad was born in 1965. And he got the job he still has today when he was about 30, about my age now, which is weird to think about. So, and my dad's always been really conservative, of course, but he wasn't starting his job at the age of Facebook and Twitter, where you tell everybody what you think about everything, and where the government or anyone could just go and pull up your tweet from 5 years ago. And so that does make it difficult for people. And I mean, I think, we have seen a systematic, not just in the university, but you think about the field of medicine, or the field of, therapists, right?
Yeah.
Like all of the really good therapists who want to do their job and help kids are being told they have to affirm new gender identities, right? So what's going to happen when you drive out all the good therapists? When you drive out all the good doctors who are like, no, I'm not going to perform abortions or refer people to people who can't perform abortions, or no, I'm not going to teach, or kowtow to academic woke nonsense.
Yeah.
I think you already have seen an implosion to a great degree. So now, the some of those friends that I mentioned, they have, with a whole lot of work and a lot of careful planning, and a lot of keeping their head down, going dark, not talking about politics in public, have sort of managed to quietly figure out their niche. And some of this is context dependent. Some of it is field dependent. In philosophy, there's some wiggle room if you're more analytic, there's still enough of the people who just care about philosophy and don't care about politics. They just want to know if you can do the job well, if you can write well, give good papers. So that may go away, though. That may end up being harder.
Some people in my circle, when you say write a good paper, that kind of depends on how they define that term to a certain extent. And again, this isn't like relativism, but I've had friends who are in PhD programs, whether that in a variety of areas where they're asked to assess an issue, and they disagree fundamentally with the solution. And so, that they believe that the problem, whether that be systemic racism or something like that, is just kind of, that from their perspective is, well, I don't see this as a problem. And so the solution you're asking me to present isn't necessarily there. And so they challenge the underlying presuppositions of the problem. And then they get a poor grade or something like that.
Right.
I think that's where it concerns me, especially when you look at like Gordon Conwell doing like a theology of diversity and inclusion and equity. Did you see that they had that page?
No.
Yeah, which is funny because its acronym is DIE.
Right.
They got it wrong.
Yes. Well, it's not an inappropriate acronym. So I think what you're going to see, I think you already are seeing this increasingly, is you're going to see kind of an exodus of Christians in mainstream academic spaces going to classical Christian school spaces. Mm. I think you're going to see more people trying to launch Christian institutions. So my friend John Mark Reynolds, who's a philosopher based in Texas, his Constantine School is one of these experiments. So, they serve kids of all ages and then also college students. So there are some exciting experiments like that. It's still in early days, but the hope, I think in hope, Rod Dreher would be so pleased. It's sort of a Benedict option-y kind of thing. Yeah. I think you're going to see Christians gradually figuring out how to build their own academic subculture, and hopefully it's going to be, an improvement over what we have currently.
Right. Now, what were you going to say? I cut you off there.
I was going to say, I think some of the examples that you see now are wedded to old paradigms, and some of the degrees that they offer are just not that strong yet because they just don't have the muscle power yet. Right. So what you might see is that as increasingly more Christians leave those universities, it'd be like, it's sort of like Christian movie making, right? Right. But why did Christian movies suck? Well, I mean, to a great extent, it's because there's not a whole lot of people out there trying to make them, right? And so when you have a really small talent pool, you got to wait. It takes time to develop a critical mass of talent. So I think that's what you see right now with Christian academia is that we're not there yet as far as a critical mass of talent.
Well, isn't there more factors though too from the standpoint of like accreditation? Accreditation is an issue for a lot of Christian schools, and you do have people who end up trying to go and get a job at a community college, and they find themselves being declined because the accreditation that they have is not the kind of accreditation that the school wants. I've talked to a lot of guys who, went to a Christian school or something like that. They apply for a community college and they say, hey, sorry, you're really smart. I know you're really smart. In fact, I look at you've written articles and gotten them published and stuff, but they just de facto cut you off if you don't have the accreditation. I think that is one of the things that's also challenging. Would you agree with that? Like as far as what your friends trying to get up and running, going along the lines of like the cultural issues and things like that. What are the cultural issues that you think we need to be concerned about right now? Kind of like your top three, but also do you think that, so it's really kind of two, what are the cultural issues on in your view? Because there's a lot. I mean, you could talk about a whole bunch of them, but like in your view, what are those strategic cultural issues that we need to be really beefing up our understanding on and our strategies on? But also, how do you think COVID impacted the credibility of Christians in the public square? Does that make sense? Like, do you think
it does?
Kind
of
weakened, like in the
so
sense
as I was right. So to your question, what issues Christians need to be engaged on? in a lot of spaces, that question was a little bit tough for me, actually, because in a lot of important areas, I mean, I can certainly think of, there are Christian organizations out there doing the good work on abortion. There are good Christians out there writing about sex and gender issues. There's Neil doing his work on critical theory, right? So I really had to kind of think hard, what's something where I really feel like I have trouble seeing people, like a lot of Christians, talking about or getting into this. So I came up with two. I came up with one that was like a broader cultural issue, but intersects with the church. And then I came up with one that's more of an in-house church problem.
Thank you for listening to the first part of my discussion with Dr. Bethel McGrew. Her origin story is inspirational for anyone wanting to live the intellectual life. But if you really want to get into the meatier topics of our discussion, you'll have to wait till part 2 of this discussion, where we dive into the 2 most pressing cultural issues for Christian churches. This is going to be a great conversation, so you won't want to miss it. And we promise to get this up for you before Thanksgiving next week, when you're with all your family and friends, so you can be ready to debate till your heart's content. And if you were wondering why I sound like Barry White, it's because we recorded this outro after the interview, and I am getting over a cold. Thank you for understanding. Pray for me. If you do, I'm Daniel Roberts. Thanks for listening. And remember, like, share, and keep thinking.